All right, everybody. This is attempt number two for Eric Wolk and I. Eric, thank you so much for joining. I'm always hesitant to introduce my guests on these vlogs because I can never do justice to everything that you've accomplished. But I'd love for you to give yourself an introduction to everybody. And I'll just say my piece is that I've worked with Eric. Eric's a chiropractor out of Cleveland. And through my host of squash injuries, Eric's kind of always been a good friend and also a great source of knowledge for me to heal or to do my prehab. But Eric, the screen is yours to give everybody an introduction as to what you do.
Appreciate that, Mike. So like you said, chiropractor out of Cleveland, originally from Scranton, PA. Wife brought me out to the great Cleveland. I've been in Cleveland for about 6 years now. Started off as an associate and worked my way up. But January of 2020, I had enough and opened up my own practice. And so now I'm in Beechwood, which is a east side suburb of Cleveland, and we're a full physical medicine practice. That's the goal right now. I am the sole chiropractor. We do a lot of something called active release techniques or ART. See it a lot. A lot of different professional teams and athletes right now, and we can get into that a little bit more. But additionally, we just added an OT who's doing some cupping and dry needling. And again, we're trying to create a all-encompassing musculoskeletal and eventually a performance center in Cleveland. And it's been very rewarding. Obviously, if you've put a few things together, January of 2020 was a rough time to start your own business. But like I said, I would not have changed anything, and it's been extremely rewarding. And my true passion is helping people perform at their maximum, and in that avoid injury.
That's amazing. No, thank you for giving us such a wonderful rundown on the services you offer. But if we could spend a minute on each of the four kind of categories you've mentioned and kind of explain what exactly it is and how it benefits, the average athlete, that would be great. So why don't we start with chiropractic and what are its benefits for the average athlete?
So I think I've said this to you a couple of times. It's a little bit of a cheap answer, but chiropractic is whatever the state says it is.
Okay.
So in Ohio, it's a chiropractic physician. So I take that extremely. Um, I take great pride in that. Look, I am not an adjusting machine. There's chiropractic manipulation, and then there's chiropractic. I believe chiropractic should be more multifaceted, just like the human body. The manipulation is for joint restriction, but that's not always the case. And so you need to balance the chiropractic manipulation with, rehab and movement protocols to promote optimization head down. In
Right.
addition, when I say that, like your neck is a very mobile area. Everyone watch these videos of the magic hug, but does your neck always need a manipulation, or do we need to talk about how to stabilize and strengthen that? And maybe the problem is more of a restriction lower. Similarly, in the low back, I find that both the neck and the low back are just adjusted way too much, just from a notion of got to get that pop, and I don't love that. I think again, there's chiropractic, which I take important as think of like a physiotherapist, sports doc, and then there's the chiropractic adjustment. And so, from my perspective, I do a lot of education on what chiropractic is, and it is not just the adjustment.
Interesting. I didn't really. know that. I thought of it as just adjusting. What about cupping? Yeah, why don't we talk about
Yeah.
cupping for a
So
second?
the reason, so I do believe that there's a place for OT in this profession because when you're injured, there's accommodations that need to be done. But not all OTs are created equal. And so the OT that I brought to the practice, he's also a previous athlete. And so he's gone out of his way to do other things to better himself. And that is cupping and dry needling. And really what that is, the cupping is performance maintenance. It brings inflammation to the area, which is a natural healing response that we have. So if you're a professional athlete and you have a lot of wear and tear, it is a great thing to expedite that process. The dry needling is a similar thing, but it also can help with pain management and trigger point therapy in essence.
Interesting. And then, yeah, so dry needling similar to all of that, to cupping as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
The dry needling and the cupping, the dry needling is more of that like pain management. And then you can also hook it up to some stim,
Yeah.
Which again is a really nice adjunct to some of the rehab or movement protocols that you're providing and the adjustments. So now you're really getting that full picture of physical medicine as opposed to just the chiropractic adjustment.
Interesting. And what about ART?
So then again, that is another thing is if you have a mobility issue, it doesn't always mean a joint restriction. You could have a tissue extensibility issue.
For sure, yeah.
So if it's not a joint and it is a tissue, active release helps release that, but in the plane of motion, which in research has shown is the really only way you can say you're releasing a hypertonic or scarred over tissue. Otherwise, you just compress it.
Interesting. And so, like, if I've been around sport for so long, right? So now, if I'm in a training room, you think I've seen ART? What is it kind of like?
So you're not going to necessarily see active release in a training room, and active release is a company. Okay, so
okay.
It is a company that you have to do training in and you pay fees for. What it is you're in essence shortening the muscle, taking a tissue tension and lengthening or eccentrically contracting under that tension. I'm going to tell you right now, the people who think that they can do it by just saying that I understand pin and stretch, they're not going to be as good because the hours that ART certified professionals and full body certified professionals, they have put a ton of time and a ton of money into. And so going to somebody who says they do pin and stretch, it is different.
Right.
It is different. And I will tell you that if I was to refer somebody across country or in another state, I'm going to find an ART provider because then I know that that person took it upon themselves to do something far more than what they got at school.
That's interesting. I thought it was a technique. I didn't know it was some sort of school or certification. But
active release techniques for ART is a company.
That's amazing.
They've patented that name.
Cool. Well, let's pivot into squash because you've obviously been around it through me, and obviously on court with me as well. And you've obviously come to Baltimore and helped some of the guys in Cleveland as well. I just wanted to touch base, since a lot of squash players are getting back on court after the pandemic, kind of without having access to a court, a lot of people not having access to those sort of movements in general. What do you think people should be focusing on as they try to get back on court and slowly get back on court to prevent injury or prehab and things like that?
Right. So again, I think a lot of things require some sort of stability. It's a very highly mobile sport. So you're going to want to really work on making sure that your lower extremity joints are in the correct sequence of, you are getting good ankle mobility. In turn, you have good knee stability, and in turn, you have good hip mobility. That's kind of just a really easy way to think about it. I think that if you've played squash before, it's going to be obviously easier to come back. I would say if you've never played any sort of sport like that, I think plyometrics is a great set of exercises that are going to help you mimic that short burst movements that you're going to find. I think basketball is another one that you're, just because of the contact of the court and the sharp cutting, could also be something that if you're worried about, playing squash for 45 minutes for the first time, maybe get warmed up with something similar first. I always find that these sports lend themselves to lower extremity injuries, whether you're going to pull your hamstring or tear your Achilles.
We don't talk about that.
The plyometrics is a great way to plyometrics is a great way to really give yourself a nice base. And then it's about instruction, as I'm sure we can kind of go into.
Totally.
You shouldn't be playing in a league right off the bat.
Right. No, that makes sense. I just feel like a lot of guys, and mentally want to pick back up where they left off maybe 18, 20 months ago. But the reality, the situation, the body isn't there. So people need to focus on the plyometrics and like the dynamic warm-ups. And are you a proponent of dynamic versus static warm-ups?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially what you said, warm-up. If you are, the problem with stretching is, I don't think people understand, when you eccentrically contract or you stretch, you are inhibiting the muscle.
Yeah.
So why would you then work it out? So pre must be dynamic. It is solely to bring blood into the area and warm things up. Stretch after.
No, for sure. And that's something like I took a course during the pandemic, and I think it was Mike Boyles, and they were talking about how a dynamic warm-up versus a static warm-up, and then they had people do explosive activities, and the dynamic warm-up individual just had a higher performance than the static stretching, even though you feel like, oh, the muscle stretched and you should be able to get full range of motion or whatever people think. It was really interesting to me.
And I think that actually the biggest thing between the two is risk for injury is so much different.
Yeah. In your experience and watching the average squash player, what do you think kind of the hot areas of injuries can be, and anything you suggest people kind of add into their prehab or warm-up cool down routines for certain body parts?
Yeah, so again, like I think that any sort of jogging or cardiovascular pre-warm-up is going to be a good thing to do prior to playing. But I again kind of would lean a little bit towards somebody of more of like a professional squash instructor to be that guide. Okay. Mm-hmm. As much as I, love the sport and know the sport, I do think that there are better authorities for that kind of subject matter. Again, injury changes everything.
Right.
So a pre-existing injury is the number one predisposition to another injury. And so again, I think it has to be, it needs to be very specific to the individual. But I don't know if I really great
No, no,
names.
you touched on it, but you're also being a little careful as to how you uh but let me ask you kind of if someone had, so like squash players in general have tight hips, right? So what would you sort of recommend um just for an
Yeah, again,
athlete?
going kind of back to that alternating pattern.
Yeah.
Ankle and hip mobility are essential. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, everybody has ankle restriction, period.
Yeah.
If you wear shoes, you are not dorsiflexing enough. And so when you hit the ground and your knee starts coming over your foot,
Mm-hmm.
if your ankle is not dorsiflexing enough, that is when you start seeing those posterior chain injuries, Achilles, calf, and then you just can go all the way up. So something that I really like, and you can find it, is in essence, you put like, I want to say maybe a 6-inch piece of tape from the wall, and you put your toe on that tape, and then you're trying to, in essence, bring your knee to the wall. You're creating that motion in a very safe way, getting that dynamic range of motion. Don't think of it as a stretch of your Achilles or gastroc. So it doesn't need to be a 30 to 40 second hold.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing the motion to get that ankle moving. In addition, like you said, with the hip mobility, we sit way too much, and we lose our hip mobility very quickly. And a lot of people think that it's like uniplanar, meaning flexion, extension, gait. But we also have abduction, adduction, external and internal rotation. And so if you can create these dynamic movements in your prehab to mimic those and work on those, it'll be great. There's a great exercise that you could do that's dynamic, where in essence you're sitting back with your hands behind you, and you have your knees kind of up with your heels in front of you, and you're just kind of doing, I call them windshields, where you're in essence putting your hip through external and internal rotation, and the other one is doing the opposite. And so again, you are literally prepping your hip to be able to do all these motions. And that's going to be your internal and external rotation. So that can't be the only thing you do. You want to do your lunges. You want to do your bird dogs. You want to do your clamshells. Those are things that are extremely important, and you can't forget one.
Yeah.
Because that will be your compensation.
Yeah, there's no either or of this stuff. Is there a specific amount of time that people should warm up for, or is it just kind of
I
like...
think warm up should be kind of just like a 15 to 25 minute thing. And it really should just kind of be that, you're trying to get that quote unquote lather. You kind of feel a little sweat, but not too much.
Yeah.
If you're just starting to, like, if you wear a Whoop or something and your heart rate is increasing to a certain degree, I'm sure there's thresholds that can kind of give you that barometer of, I did too much, or I'm right where I need to be. And then you can kind of use that as reference.
Got it. Cool. Well, that's a lot of information for, I think, a lot of people, so I appreciate it. But in closing, if, say, someone had an hour a week to see someone like you and focus on one of the 4 categories we discussed, where do you think they'll see the most benefit? Like chiropractic manipulation, cupping, dry needling, ART, or is it...
I actually will, and this might not be the most self-promoting, but I think the number one thing that I do is educate. Mm-hmm. And so when you come here, I'm going to give you information, and I'm going to try and empower you through education. And so I really take that as fundamentally the most important thing that anybody in healthcare can be. is a perpetuator of knowledge.
Got it. No, that's super helpful. Well, I really do appreciate your time, and I'm sure everybody else listening does too. Do you want to just shout out your Instagram handles and ways people can reach out to you for more questions?
Absolutely. I appreciate your time too, Monica. And it's always been a pleasure. So Instagram is Great Lakes Physical Med. And then website is greatlakesphysicalmedicine.com. Try and do a monthly newsletter, just again, from that notion of education. What am I reading? What do I want people to know? And not necessarily because I think it, but I just, again, feel very strongly about being a conduit of knowledge. Again, very easy to schedule if you're in the Cleveland area or if you're passing through. I've got online appointments. I see patients Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 to 7.
Wow, long days.
Long days, but you have some days off. So
I like it.
It's a good trade-off. It's a good trade-off,
for sure. Well, man, thank you so much. I know this is round 2, so I appreciate your time double.
Thank you.
And we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Well.